In this video, I want to discuss briefly the use of the telephone in your daily business life. I'm not talking about a social aspect to it. I'm not really talking about the social use of the telephone. I am talking about the use of the telephone in your normal everyday life, and I want to explain my view of it, and hopefully you might learn something or you might find something useful in my riff, essentially, on the use of the telephone. Firstly, there is a significantly interruptive or disruptive or distracting element to the telephone, insofar as if you are running a business like mine and you're working away and you're trying to focus on doing work that is important to you, and you are being interrupted or disrupted or distracted by having to answer the phone or respond to calls, there is clearly a problem in relation to the interruptive nature of a telephone, and the fact that somebody can pick the phone up, dial it, and expect you to answer it and respond and deal with whatever they want to discuss out of the blue in an unscheduled, unformatted, ad hoc sort of a basis. That's not a good use of your time, I don't believe. It's certainly not a good use of my time, and it's why it's very, very difficult to catch me or get me on an unscheduled telephone call. The reason, quite frankly, is I will not answer the phone because of the interruptive, distracting nature of it, and the fact that it will prevent me from doing the work that I have chosen to do. Second thing that I would say in relation to responding to the telephone and answering the phone, answering calls and so on, is that you are almost always taken off guard, and there's a difficulty because you don't know what the other side wants to talk about. There's a difficulty in that you may react or respond in an inappropriate way, in a way that is out of control. You're taken off guard, and you may give a response that isn't considered, that you may regret later on. That is obviously more likely to happen taking a phone call, an unscheduled phone call from somebody, and you are discussing something of which you have absolutely no notice. That is not a smart use of my time, I don't believe, and I'm not going to run that risk, quite frankly, of responding in a reactive, ad hoc sort of way. If you consider anybody on a football field or a hurling field, for example, and somebody gives a lad a sly dig with the hurl or a tap at the ankles with the foot, the likelihood is you're going to get retaliation. And it's human nature that you will retaliate. It is human nature that the guy that retaliates is probably going to be in bigger trouble than the fella who initiated it, because the fella who initiated the thing at the outset, the sly dig, he's done it in a considered, strategic sort of a way, whereas the fella that reacts or responds is reacting and responding in a most natural way, but perhaps not the way that would give him the best result in the long run. And that's why there's an off-guard or reactive, out-of-control sort of response to phone calls, which I don't like and which I, quite frankly, don't engage in. I avoid, because I don't answer the phone. There is another aspect to the use of the phone, that is the whole question of the use of your time in a very, very effective, efficient way. There is invariably, when you speak with somebody on the phone, a certain element of social mores, as it were. You're going to engage in certain social niceties. You're going to discuss, perhaps what you're doing at the weekend or what you did last weekend. You're going to engage in chit-chat, the normal social stuff. But unfortunately, from a business perspective, that can be difficult and it can be time-consuming. And if you did that 5, 10, 15 times a day, you could be looking at a lot of time spent talking about what you did at the weekend. So it's not the most efficient, effective way for you to run your business if you are involved in the business like mine, where you actually sell your time in little chunks. There's another aspect to the use of the telephone, and that is when you understand the whole question of synchronous and asynchronous communication. Synchronous communication involves the two people who are communicating, being present and communicating at the same time. That's obviously the telephone. Asynchronous communication, on the other hand, would be text messages or emails. That type of communication does not require both parties to be present at the same time. And it can be, and certainly is my view, that it's far more efficient, far more effective use of time to engage in asynchronous communication. That's not to say that synchronous communication or the use of the telephone isn't useful from time to time, but from my perspective, I would be very strategic about the use of the telephone, and I would pick my times, and I would know or want to know what the nature of the call was about and what I was trying to achieve. But I would be steering clear of responding in a sort of an ad hoc, out of control, reactive, responsive sort of a way. Doesn't make any sense. The question then of time efficiency, time effectiveness, asynchronous communication, that is text messages or emails, etc., allows both parties to respond at a time that suits them and at a time that is perhaps when they are taking some downtime or at least not engaged in whatever work they're engaged in when the message comes through. In other words, the distracting nature, the intrusive nature of the telephone communication is removed because you only respond when it suits you. So, for example, if I get a communication by email at 2:30 in the afternoon, I can respond when it suits me at 3:30 or 4 or 5 or 6 that evening. At the most efficient time for me, I can consider my response, I can weigh up the pros and cons, and I can give the very best information, best advice, best response that I can. Whereas if I respond by telephone out of the blue to an unscheduled phone call, it's unlikely to be as considered and as good a view or an opinion as I can do. So that's one of the reasons why I would maintain that the use of the telephone, whilst can be important and can be useful, needs to be managed with great degree of care because of the factors that I've set out and because of the fact that it's synchronous communication. It requires both parties to be engaged at the same time. And if you ever try to have a conversation with somebody and spent half a day or 2 days playing phone tag with the other party, for example, I ring through to talk to another solicitor and I'm told he's in a meeting or she's in a meeting, they ring back, I'm in a meeting, and so on. This can go on for 2 days. It's absolutely ridiculous. It is a complete waste of time. Not only is it a waste of my time, but it's a waste of receptionist time and personal assistance time and administration staff time and so on. In my view, it's far more efficient just to send an email. If you do, or a text message, if you do, I can respond when it suits me and the other party can as well. So there is a time and place, there's no doubt about it, for the use of the telephone. But I do believe very, very strongly that it needs to be managed very, very carefully and very strategically and very intentionally. Hope you find this video useful. If you do, give it a thumbs up down below, and you may be interested in subscribing to my YouTube channel.